Our gospel lesson is found in the Gospel according to John in the first chapter and beginning with the 43rd verse. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him whom Moses and the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, he said of him, "Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "Where did you get to know me?" Jesus answered, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God, you are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." May God bless the reading and hearing of this word. May we hear in it a word that is to us and for us on this day. I read something last week. I haven't had a chance to fact check it yet. But I'm not going to let that stop me from sharing it with you. I'll encourage you to fact check it for me, but I will share it, and as I do, I must say it has the ring of truth to me. And this is it. Jesus never encountered anyone except for children whom he didn't ask to do something or to change something, or both. What I do know is that the whole of the New Testament revolves around this idea of metanoia. One need not be a diligent student of the Greek New Testament to have encountered this word or to know of its meaning. It means to be changed in heart or mind, particularly changed in heart by an encounter with God. Our gospel lesson includes the invitation to come and see. And it is that act, at least in this story, in which a new follower of Jesus came to experience metanoia. The whole idea caused my mind to backpedal in my life to Klein Woody. Klein Woody taught me how to fish. He always insisted that I call him Klein, even though the rule makers in my house would have expected me to call him Mr. Woody. I was granted special permission at his request to call him by his first name. Klein was for decades a ranger, a forest ranger in the northeast Georgia mountains. His father had done the same thing before him. By the time I knew him, he was retired from that work, but he was big enough in body and in spirit that I, as a child, had no problem imagining taking care of a forest all by himself. Klein lived in a small, unincorporated town named Suches, Georgia, named for a Cherokee chief. He was a member of the church that my father pastored for a few years before Dad figured out that ministry was not his calling. Despite that decision, our family remained close to many people in that area, and we would return at least one time every year, most often in the summer, and visit with families there. Sometimes when travel arrangements could be made, I would stay back for a few extra days after the rest of my family had gone home. When I did, I would stay in the home of Klein and his wife, Oline, on their hog farm and would fish in the small lake whose waves washed up to the edge of their backyard. Whenever I returned from fishing, my routine included instructions from Oline to take off my muddy shoes and to report to Klein my success or lack thereof on my fishing expedition. When I didn't have much success, which was quite often, Klein had a ready-made excuse, which had to do with either the weather or the water level or the time of year, which explained away my lack of success in some way without attributing it to the fact that I wasn't a very good fisherman. He would provide a tip or two along with the assurance that I would do better next time. And he also promised one day to teach me how to tell a story about a fish this big and turn it into a story about a fish that big. He was probably the first person outside of my family who caused feelings of love and admiration to well up in my young soul. He had a smile which was every bit as present in his eyes as it was formed with his mouth. Klein had the look of someone who was in on a joke that not everybody was privy to. And speaking of jokes, when I was old enough, he told me some sketchy jokes, which made me feel invited into the adult world, and it made me love him even more. But life happened. I entered into and then began to move through my adolescence, and there were fewer trips for me to such-as. Sometimes my family would go, and I would stay behind, caught up as I was in school and sports and a part-time job and what other activities, wholesome or otherwise, occupied my time as a teenager. I saw him less and less as the years passed, and then I went away to college. And it was when I came home from a Christmas break that I discovered heard the news that Klein had been diagnosed with cancer, and the diagnosis and prognosis was bleak. I wish I could tell you that I took the first opportunity to go back and to visit him, but I waited months before Oline called me with the gentle reminder that said, "You need to come and see. Come and see Klein while there's time." Klein became the first person I watched die, which is not to say that I was in the room when he passed. It is to say that he was the first person whom I had known as big and strong and full of life and laughter and questionable jokes, who had that life drained from him by a terrible disease. It was only in reflecting upon the few moments I spent with Klein in the course of a couple of visits that I realized it was my introduction into the manner in which life can be beautiful and mysterious and horrible and frightening all at the same time. Those moments may have contributed to the eventual decision for me to embrace a vocation which involved me being involved in those passages in people's lives. I was barely 20 years old, and in my innocence, I felt remorse that I could not find the right words to say at his bedside. I vowed to myself that I would learn the right words, only to come full circle and discover that there are no right words. Metanoia. I was invited to come and see, and that seeing stayed with me. It even changed me. This passage from John seems to hinge on those words, come and see. In the early chapters of John's gospel, he gives us little snapshots of the calling of the disciples, and in this case, it is Nathanael who is front and center. And as it turns out, most all of what we know about Nathanael we learn here in this first chapter of John. Nathanael was initially not impressed with Jesus. More specifically, he was not impressed with Jesus' hometown of Nazareth. No great prophets, no great families, no great movements had emerged from Nazareth. So just imagine a small town in which the only people that live there are the people who are stuck there without any other options. When Philip shared his conviction that Jesus the Nazarene was the Messiah on whom they had been waiting, it was this very protest that Nathanael articulated. Can anything good come from Nazareth? Philip's response, come and see. There's a nuance to this encounter which is easily missed because of our cultural and language differences from the writer and his original audience. As Jesus engages Nathanael in conversation, Nathanael is confused because Jesus seems to have already met him. For years, I wrote a religious column in the Burlington newspaper, and they asked for a picture to place alongside my column. And I did what any reasonable and vain person would do. I gave them a picture of me from several years earlier. It protected my vanity, but it also meant that people on the street wouldn't necessarily recognize me immediately from the picture. And given what I had to say in my articles and the nature of the small town in which I lived and its audience, plausible deniability was always a good thing to have in my pocket. One day while standing in line at the post office, I could feel myself being watched. You ever have that feeling somebody's watching you? Finally, I was about to leave. A gentleman approached me and he said, "I know you." Now, I didn't think we'd ever met, but I let him keep talking and figured out I'd come to know the nature of our acquaintance. And he said, "You're that liberal guy that writes for the newspaper." All right, I said for myself, let's see where this is going. And I felt a little tension settle there in my shoulders. He went on to say, "I read your columns and I agree with about half of what you've got to say." I immediately relaxed and laughed and said, "That's great. I believe about half of what I've got to say, so we ought to get along just fine." We talked for long enough to learn that while different in many of our beliefs, we had enough in common that we'd get along. Nathanael and Jesus had a similar encounter when Jesus spoke to Nathanael as if they'd already been acquainted. Nathanael asked, "Where did I get to know you?" And Jesus said, "I saw you standing underneath the fig tree." And this is what might be easy to miss. In the Hebrew Testament imagery, to be standing under a fig tree had deeply symbolic meaning. It meant to be in a place of comfort and peace. To be under a fig tree, it was to be in a place in which one was at ease. It would be to be in a place that one didn't necessarily want to leave. Nathanael was in that space. Nathanael was comfortable. He was right where he wanted to be under that fig tree. He wasn't looking to have his life changed or the way he saw life changed, particularly by a rabbi from Nazareth. Hollywood has an oft-used way of depicting the complexities of human nature. They will use the camera at a certain angle so that a face is half in the shade and half in the light. That captures the complexity of most of us, and that is how I picture Nathanael underneath that fig tree. Half in the shade and half in the light, partly entrenched by his own prejudice such that he can't believe that anything good can come from Nazareth, but in part hungry and hopeful that maybe, just maybe, it was true. So this was the perfect invitation to Nathanael, "Come and see." It might well have been worded, "Come out from underneath that fig tree where you are comfortable and you are in fact stuck. Come and see." I would suggest that our world would be a lot better with a lot more coming and seeing and a lot less standing underneath the comfort of our own fig trees. Finley Peter Doone, for many years, wrote underneath the pseudonym of Mr. Dooley. Probably came pretty close to the truth when he famously said that Jesus came to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And he went on to say that if that's how Jesus operated, then maybe Jesus' church should operate in the same manner. But it all starts with an invitation to come and to see. As we observe Martin Luther King Jr. Day this weekend, we might be reminded of that one of the inspirations for the civil rights movement was associated with the cold-blooded murder of a young black man named Emmett Till. Emmett Till was from Chicago and was 14 years old when he visited his family in Mississippi. While the details have always been in dispute, he said something or did something which violated the unwritten code between black people and white people living in the Jim Crow South. When he crossed the paths of a white store owner named Carolyn Bryant. A few nights later, Carolyn Bryant's husband and his half-brother went to Emmett Till's uncle's home and abducted Emmett Till. Beat him beyond recognition, shot him in the head, and threw him in the Tallahatchie River. The murderers were ultimately found not guilty by an all-white jury, and much of the world was aghast, but very few people were surprised. They would later confess that they did it not because they had tortured consciences, but because a magazine offered them $4,000 for their story. But before the injustice of that trial, the body of Emmett Till was returned to Chicago. And ignoring the advice of many, Emmett Till's mother chose to have an open casket, revealing the bloated and mutilated nature of Emmett Till's body. Her intentions were clear. Get out from underneath your fig tree and come and see. Come and see what racism looks like. Come and see what hatred looks like. Come and see what prejudice looks like. Come and see what it looks like when good people remain silent. It was Dr. King who would later say, a time comes when silence is betrayal, but it was Emmett Till's mother who extended the invitation to come and see what that betrayal looked like. Tens of thousands of people attended that open casket funeral, and one historian summed it up this way. The open casket funeral held by Mamie Till Bradley exposed the world to more than her son Emmett Till's bloated, mutilated body. Her decision focused attention not only on American racism and the barbarism of lynching, but also on the limitations and vulnerabilities of American democracy. The invitation was offered to a nation and to a world to come out from the comfort of our fig trees and to see. Among those who accepted that invitation was a young Martin Luther King Jr. who was 26 years old when Emmett Till was murdered. He came and he saw. And the course of history was changed. Come and see. That is always the invitation. Whether it is a young man coming to see the death of a loved one for the first time, or a nation coming to see, being forced to see the nature of its original sin in a new way, or a young Martin Luther King who comes and sees something which helps to give him a prophetic voice, or a soon-to-be disciple named Nathaniel who comes and sees in a manner which shakes him out of his prejudice and pulls him out from underneath the comfort of his fig tree. That is always the invitation. Come and see. I hope we will be busy doing a thing. I hope we will be busy doing a thing which is so grand that success is not guaranteed. I hope we will be busy doing a thing which requires the humility to admit we still have work to do. I hope we will be busy building a faith community in which a commitment to love involves being more than just nice people. It means being involved in the grubby and difficult work of forgiveness and reconciliation. It means extending grace to those whose very place in our world forces us to come out from the shade of our fig tree to come and see. It means to make space where we can invite others to come along with us, to come and see. To come and see what isn't yet but might be. To come and see what I'm not yet. To come and see what you're not yet. To come and see what this church isn't yet. To come and see what our community isn't yet. To come and see what our world isn't yet but might still be. Hand in hand and arm in arm, let us hear the invitation together to come and to see. Amen.